Hi, welcome, and thank you, General John Allen, so much for joining us today. I have so many questions for you, and I'm eager to get started. I think first off, we just have to acknowledge what an extraordinary moment this is right now. I'm curious what you think of the short-term and long-term impacts. Obviously, we have President Donald Trump right now kind of refusing to concede the election. He's alleging widespread voter fraud in several states in the U.S. What do you see as kind of the short-term impact of these allegations and the long-term impact? Do you see this having lasting damage on the country?
Well, first, let me just say how pleased I am to be with this forum today, and to let all of our friends in Europe know how much we're with our European friends in this moment of COVID crisis, and we recognize the losses and the challenges that you're facing, and we're with you in this moment. No one is surprised at Donald Trump's reaction to the outcome of the election. He has been preparing his followers, but more broadly the American public, for some period of time. And I'll remind the audience that in 2016, he was asked specifically the question, would he accept the outcome of that election? And he said he would, so long as he won. So this is no surprise for us that he has chosen not to accept the outcome of this election. But I'll say that the American democratic process, and of course it's unique, all democracies have its own unique dimension to it in terms of voting. It worked as expected, it worked as intended. And part of that process is frequently the reality that there will be irregularities that could be detected. There could be a desire to resolve those irregularities in the court. And that's what I think we're seeing now. And where President Trump was, I think, not very presidential, frankly, in the couple of occasions where he has spoken to the public about his allegations of widespread systematic voter fraud, etc. Where we saw him initially quite vocal on that matter, he's been quiet of late. We have seen some of his surrogates also begin to counsel him on the potential realities of what's about to happen. And it is his right. It is the right within our democratic process that someone who believes that there's an irregularity in that process to seek resolution in the courts. But frankly, the allegations that have been made by he or many other members of his inner circle that there is widespread voter fraud and that the election was stolen from him, there's no evidence to that at this point. And Rudy Giuliani appears to be walking point for him on this matter. We've not gotten a very clear explanation from him as to what the issue is. But today, Monday, he's supposed to come out, Giuliani, and on behalf of the president, come out with a strategy, a legal strategy to challenge in the courts, multiple courts. And I'll simply say that there have been a number of suits that have been placed at this point, and many of the lower courts have simply thrown them out without merit or without substance. So in the short term, we'll see the legal process that accompanies the American democratic process play out in ways that we expect. And frankly, we'll see vote recounts. And that's also a normal part of the American democratic process. But I will simply tell you that those recount processes very seldom push the outcomes very much at all in terms of the final numbers of votes. I think the largest ever was in Florida in about 1,200 votes in year 2000. But the margins are very small. And in most of the states in question right now, with the exception of Arizona, where the Biden lead has in fact shrunk, the Biden lead has actually increased in the other states. So we all support the president in moving to the courts to resolve these issues, because in the end, resolving these issues in a legal manner reinforces our democracy, doesn't challenge it. The problem is when the president simply makes these baseless statements without evidence that the election was stolen from him. It wasn't, and he'll move forward. That's a short term. Longer term, Courtney, you asked. This was the most participatory election in American history. Almost 150 million people voted in this election. I think the President-elect Biden will probably get about 75 million or more. President Trump will get about 70 million or more. Those are very significant numbers. And my fear is at this moment, when we've seen greater participation in this election than in any other, that this concern by the president, these baseless allegations by the president that our democratic process was fundamentally corrupt and flawed, will hurt American confidence in the process. I would simply say to Americans and to our international friends, the democratic process in the United States, unique to our Constitution, it worked. And part of that is a legal process that is intended for either of the candidates to resolve the issues. Over the long term, then, my concern is about confidence in the system. Over the longer term, I'm a bit concerned that we could find some implicit call for supporters of the president to go into the streets to protest. We're concerned about we're hearing of intentions to hold rallies. And while local municipalities were willing to permit these rallies to go, even though they massively violated public health issues, those were consequent to the campaign. Rallies now to try to put public pressure on elected officials to change their position on the outcomes of the election, those actually are threats to public safety, and they should be treated that way. So I think we'll see that in the short term, we'll see the remedies in the courts. I don't think it will work to his advantage, the president's advantage. Over the long term, I worry about the further polarization of the political sides in America and an increase of concern over the confidence of the outcome of elections by virtue of the president's condemnation of the outcome.
Right. I think that's a great distinction you're making between these normal process that goes through the courts and then the president's allegations of widespread fraud, which we've seen no evidence of so far. And like you mentioned, it seems like more than 70 million people will have voted for Donald Trump when all the votes are counted. I'm curious, do you have a sense of what percentage of those voters you think will accept the results if, the courts do verify that Joe Biden did win the election?
Who knows? To be quite honest with you. A large number were not particularly happy in 2016, and you saw some peaceful public demonstrations. A million women went into the streets the day after the inauguration, and that's also a very important part of the American society, the right to peacefully protest. So we may well see protests if they remain peaceful. That is absolutely the First Amendment to our Constitution, their First Amendment right to go into the streets and to peacefully protest the outcome of the election. And that's okay, so long as it remains peaceful. And we should expect that. And how many, as you say, what percentage will accept it? Just who knows? But part of our democratic system is just in 2016, when a very large number, in fact, the preponderance of the popular vote, voted for Hillary Clinton, you didn't see widespread violence across the country. You saw that electorate accept the outcome as the spoken democratic voice of our people, and we moved forward. My hope is that President Trump, when he finally decides that it's not possible for him to further contest the election, will do the right thing, will act with magnanimity and concede. No one actually expects that to happen, but go peacefully. So that we do have something which is extraordinarily important in any democracy, and in particular our democracy, that we have a peaceful transition of power. Meanwhile, President-elect Biden moves forward with all dispatch to begin to prepare for his administration to take position. And my guess is that he's going to let all of the legal issues play out in the court while he prepares to leave the country on the 20th of January.
And that's a great transition to my next topic, which was I was going to ask you, what do you see as kind of the first 100 days of the Biden administration? What do you see as his key policies, and to what extent do you think he'll be successful in reversing some of the key iconic policies of the Trump administration?
That's a really important question. Several things I think will be the case. First, in the context of the potential Biden-Senate relationship, the administration relationship to the Senate, the Senate is an extraordinarily important component of our government. And as is the case in our Constitution, all senior governmental appointees have to be confirmed after hearings by the Senate. And so, one of the great things about the president-elect is that he had decades in the Senate. He knows so many of the people, and he has a reputation for working across the aisle. And so our hope is that we will not see an early effort by the Senate to delay the confirmation of key appointees, because that administration really needs to get on with this issue. That's the first thing. And I think you'll see the president-elect reach out very quickly to Mitch McConnell to begin the process of having the conversation about how we move forward together on this matter. And we'll see how that goes. If you've been listening, not you, Courtney, but if people have been listening to the president-elect, what you've heard him say on a number of occasions are an articulation of what I would call the 4 pillars of his immediate action. And it's important to note. And the number 1 pillar is coming into fruition today, which is countering COVID. We have had 5 straight days of over 100,000 Americans being infected a day. 5 straight days, and it's going up. And we've had a similar number of days where well over 1,000 Americans have died each day. I mean, those are just unacceptable numbers. And so the president-elect has made that pillar his first objective, because almost nothing else can go forward successfully for his administration and for the American people, regardless of their views on the outcome of the election. Almost nothing else can go forward successfully without him dealing with that. So the 4 pillars are one, dealing with the COVID crisis. Number 2 is dealing with the other side of the same coin, which is the economic stress and crisis that the United States finds itself in at this particular moment. The third area is one that erupted in everyone's face in the aftermath of the terrible death of George Floyd, which is, I think, an extraordinarily important national recognition of the issue of racial inequity. And he's going to deal with that. And I think one of the most important demonstrations of his commitment to that is who the new vice president-elect is going to be. Kamala Harris. And I couldn't be more proud of this moment in American history. And then the fourth area is climate. They're all interrelated in some respects. And those constitute an issue, if you will, the 4 principal pillars of his efforts initially, which is, again, COVID, the economy, racial inequality and racial inequity, and ultimately climate. And then other things that you'll see, first, watch and listen very carefully to the inaugural speech. In January of 2017, when we listened to Donald Trump's inaugural speech, I mean, we just all descended into darkness. It was a very dark speech. I think you'll see in Joe Biden, first, an American embrace, a re-embrace, if you will, of human rights. An embrace of our friendships and our relationships overseas. Allies and partners and friends will really mean something to us again. And by the way, those democracies that have drifted into a liberalism, you're not going to be found to be very welcome in the Oval Office, my guess would be. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the president-elect, but you're not going to find yourself being extolled in the Oval Office. Authoritarians will defend ourselves from you, and totalitarians will deal with you as we need to. So I think that you'll see immediately a re-embrace of American human rights, the desire to have strong economic ties in a transatlantic sense, but certainly with the great democracies in East Asia as well, and certainly India. So you'll see an emphasis on democracies coming together for the future. You'll see an emphasis within the White House immediately on greater ethics that would separate the White House from the appearance of influence within the Department of Justice and other elements of our government. You'll see an immediate embrace of this administration on issues of climate. My guess will be very quickly, if not the same day, the United States will seek to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. You'll see us reverse You'll see the administration reverse the decision on the World Health Organization. You'll see an unambiguous American commitment to NATO, and in particular Article 5. You'll see an unambiguous American commitment to the United Nations and other international organizations as they exist. But also 2 very important things. where this last administration was very much transactional and very much bilateral in many respects. You'll see that this administration will talk about multilateralism and alliance structures as being the key to our foreign policy. But you'll also see a commitment to what we would call transformationalism, where when the United States participates in an organization in some form or another, we would seek to provide leadership, not hegemony, but leadership and partnership, but also to create an environment where the organization and the participants in that organization are simply greater than the sum of their parts. Transformational. We're all better because of the appearance of the United States. And then beyond that, I think you'll see a very quick issuance of a series of executive orders, eliminating the Muslim ban, eliminating a number of other issues associated with immigration. I think you'll see a re-American embrace of the Palestinians, even though we will remain utterly and completely committed to Israel's national security. I think you'll see that the United States will want to rejoin UNRWA, which when we pulled out was a major blow to the Palestinian people and to that organization within the UN. You will also probably see that the United States will very seriously examine with our partners the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with respect to the Iranian nuclear program. So I think that you'll see not an insignificant early effort by this administration to deal on the matters of climate, on the matters of our relationships with our allies and partners and friends, with our commitment to multilateralism, and then very importantly, because none of this is possible without the traditional foreign service that Americans and I think the world is used to, I think you'll see some very early and significant effort put into reinvigorating and breathing new life into our Department of State. America has been consequential on the world stage because of our diplomatic arm. And ambassadors and our envoys from the Department of State really are the leading edge of American influence, not 11 carrier strike groups, although you think about that from time to time, but really because we're able to make the case with the world community by virtue of the strength of our diplomatic corps. And we really have got to spend some time reinvigorating that in the aftermath of the 4 years that we've seen it really savaged in many respects.
You kind of alluded to this already with, NATO and Iran, but I'm just curious, how vastly different do you think that the Biden administration's foreign policy and defense policy will be from the Trump administration's? On the defense policy front, I'm thinking about, Trump had vowed to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan. Is that something Biden will continue with or try to reverse? And to what extent do you think that Biden's policy, both in foreign policy and on defense, is a form of kind of Barack Obama 2.0, and to what extent will Biden chart a different course from his predecessor?
I don't think he'll chart a different course just to be different. I think that you found in the Obama-Biden team a lot of confluence in both their views and their values. So I think that you'll see a lot of similarity, but I don't think that you'll see an intention to recreate an Obama foreign policy or defense policy 2.0. The world has changed a lot in 4 years. For example, the rise of COVID-19 has put the world and international organizations and international relations and the economic situation under enormous stress. So I think we'll see that the realities of those matters will figure into President-elect and eventually President Biden's foreign policy. With respect to Afghanistan, something I know a little about, we'll probably see that the Biden administration is going to look very, very carefully at the U.S. Taliban deal. I have been very public that I think it was a terrible deal. We made some very concrete connections and commitments to the Taliban in that deal. We did it without the Afghan government that we've been supporting now for many years being even at the table. And so while I think that the Taliban have been even marginal in their capacity to uphold their end of the deal, the one thing that I think was the greatest American failure in that, and there were a number of them in this process, was that we walked away from the table with the Taliban without a commitment ultimately to take care of the Afghan women. And we work very, very hard to protect them and ultimately to create space within the Afghan society for the rise of women in civil society and in elected government and in the security services, etc. And we did not, in that agreement with the Taliban, walk away from that with some form of with the U.S. leading an international expectation for how the Taliban would ultimately embrace the role of women in the Afghan government and Afghan society. So, we have seen the Taliban be, in some respect, quite violent in the aftermath. And I think that the Biden administration, and it's not signaled anything in any particular direction at this point, is going to take a very hard look at this organization. What we do know about Vice President Biden, and I know this personally, was that he was quite enthusiastic and quite convinced that a widespread, aggressive, American-supported counterterrorist plan was the right strategy for us to leave behind in Afghanistan. But also at the same time to invigorate the capacity of the Afghan National Security Forces to hold the line on security, whether it's in counterinsurgency operations or law enforcement. And I would not be surprised, given the numbers that we have there today, that that might not be the outcome. But as you know, the United States ultimately committed to basically a zero balance of troops this coming year in 21. I don't speak with any authority on this. I just don't think it's either possible or it's a good idea. With regard to NATO, I don't know what the Biden administration will do with respect to the withdrawal of forces out of Europe. My hope is that we would seriously rethink that. I think there's no doubt that to some extent that withdrawal was punitive. It was aimed directly at the Germans and Angela Merkel, perhaps personally. But from my perspective, it was certainly unnecessary, and lots of folks who know a lot more about the continent of Europe and NATO than I do, and there are many of them out there, believe that those troops should not be withdrawn, and the only person that benefited from that in the end was Vladimir Putin. So I think that we may well see that that's going to be re-examined as well. And I will also speculate that our relationships in Northeast Asia will also be looked at very carefully. There's a comment that's been made that the Trump administration ran our relationships with our great partners in Northeast Asia like a protection racket in the context of forcing them to pay much more money on burden sharing than ever had been imagined. This is not about transactionalism. It's not about bilateralism and transactionalism. This was that the American presence in that region was a presence that had kept the peace in the aftermath of the Korean War right to this very moment. And when we place our allies under great stress economically to pay for the American presence as though we become a mercenary force for all intents and purposes, that's not how we've been, and that's not how I think we'll be. And I think that we'll be looking at that very carefully. We've got great relations with our dear friends in the Republic of Korea and in Japan. We've had strong relationships with Taiwan. We'll continue to support Taiwan. We have great relationships elsewhere in the region. We have 2 other treaties, relationships with Thailand and the Philippines. We'll have to work our way through the problems in the streets in Bangkok right now, with the public taking exception to the new king. And we'll have to find our way to work forward with Rodrigo Duterte in Manila. So I think we've got some challenges ahead of us, but I think the path is clear. We'll celebrate our allies, friends, and partners. And for those that choose to be illiberal or authoritarian or totalitarian, we may find common interests where we can cooperate or even collaborate. But human rights are going to dominate our relationships with them, and I think that they better get ready for this.
Do you see any lasting impact of Trump's, America First foreign policy? And I'm thinking about the president's stance towards China, more hawkish stance towards China, kind of the relationships he's cultivated in the Gulf, for instance. What do you see the lasting legacy of Trump and Trumpism, both abroad and here in the United States? I mean, I think some people will probably argue after President-elect Biden takes office that, Trump and the Trump presidency were an anomaly. And I'm not sure that's quite a fair assessment. And I'm wondering what you think of that.
No. Trump is really symptomatic of a larger issue that we have to deal with as Americans in our own society. And that is large segments of the American public have felt for many years that they had no connection to Washington. They had no connection to the political elite in the United States. And in so many ways, President Trump presented for them an alternative. Someone who was not an elite politician, someone who hadn't spent a day either in uniform or in elected office. And the things that he was promising them seemed to be remedies to long-standing grievances and stresses and distresses that they had suffered. And so in 2016, they voted him into office as the President of the United States. Whether he dealt with any of those issues remains to be determined, and in most cases didn't. But we shouldn't see Donald Trump as the source of these issues. We should see him as the symptom, and ultimately a manifestation of those issues. What the problem that we have going forward is he's become, in some respects, and will become the embodiment of those issues, and will continue to have cast a very long shadow on the American political scene well past this election. And this is why so many of his allies and members of his inner circle are counseling him to be magnanimous at this particular moment. Yes, use the courts, challenge the issues that you have concerns about, produce the evidence. But when the courts have ultimately ruled and the counts remain and the recounts have not found any widespread unusual behavior in our democratic process, be magnanimous, concede, recommend, offer your best wishes to President Biden at that point, and move on. But the problem will be if he doesn't. And many of his allies have said, look, you have the potential, with all the political capital that you have that comes from 70 million voters, you have the potential to be, the term we use, kingmaker in the 2022 midterm elections and kingmaker in the 2024 presidential elections if you choose not to even run yourself. So I think there's a lot of runway ahead of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump can organize his political following to be good for the country and actually try to solve these major social issues that have dogged one administration after another. His certainly, and certainly President Biden will have to deal with them as well. He has the potential to do great good. Whether he chooses to do that or not, or chooses to create a solid group of individuals that will oppose the potential social changes that President Biden would propose with his administration, that remains to be determined. But that's a concern. Whether that long shadow that he will cast, undoubtedly will cast across the American political landscape, whether that's a shadow that can work to the good of all American people, or whether it's going to further polarize the American electorate.
Just one final follow-up question. I think we have about 2 minutes left. Is America first dead?
I hope so. Look, America's at its best when we have allies and friends and partners overseas. America's at its best when it works to the good of all of its own people. And by having strong relationships overseas and having strong trade relationships that are fair trade relationships, but free trade relationships as well, I think everyone benefits from that.
General John Allen, thank you for such a fascinating discussion at such an extraordinary time in U.S. politics. I really appreciate your time.
Great to be with you. Take care.